A very good morning to one and all. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the second day of All India Conference of China Studies. We'll now begin the third special panel with the theme, Impact of Geopolitical Factors on Economy and Trade. I kindly request the panelists to take their seats as I call their names. The session will be chaired by Dr. Jabin Saqib, who is an associate professor at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Shiv University, Delhi-NCR, and an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. We are honored to have an exceptional panel of speakers with us. Professor G. Venkat Raman, who is a professor at IIM Indore and an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. Mr. Vijay Kelkar, a researcher, analyst, and columnist. Professor S.K. Mohanty, who is a professor at the Research and Innovation Systems for Developing Countries, RIS, New Delhi. And Dr. Mohammed Saqib, founder and convener, Center for Geoeconomics for Global South, UAE. Now hand over the stage to Dr. Jacob to initiate the session. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me begin by welcoming all of you to day 3 of the 17th All India Conference on China Studies. And let me sort of, on my own personal behalf, thank Manipal for being a host to this event. Us who've been affiliated with the ICCS for a long time take the AICCS very, very seriously, and it's always a pleasure and a joy to sort of travel around with the conference and see, well, not just different parts of India, but also the students, what students in different parts of India think or are doing about China. So we've had 2 interesting days. Unfortunately, I missed the first day. But what I saw of yesterday was quite interesting, and I thought there were some excellent questions also from the audience. So I hope, and as chair, my job is to keep time, primarily, and since we are already starting, 18 minutes behind time, so I'll keep my remarks limited. But I do want to sort of call on all the speakers to please stick to time. I just reminded one speaker that unlike yesterday where the student speakers had 15 minutes, in this panel everybody only has 10 to 12 minutes, all right? So, and sometimes I can get a little animated when speakers exceed their time. So we want, is all I'm saying. But I do hope that students in the audience, I know you're all very interested in your phones, but I just want to say that all this India-China business on the boundary is now history, all right? Frankly, the future is going to be more about economics, the economy and trade. So even those of you who are doing their PhDs or working or interested in geopolitics must pay attention to this. So we are giving you a foretaste of what is about to come. And we have an excellent panel of speakers. So what I'm going to do is there a particular order? I am just going to go in the order that I see on screen next to me. So I'll start with Venkat, the very hardworking convener of the 17th AICCS. So I hope you'll clap both before and after he finishes. Over to you. Yeah.
Very good morning to all of you. The theme of this particular panel is Impact of Geopolitical Factors on Economy and Trade. When we talk of impact of geopolitical factors on economy and trade, what immediately comes to our mind, one of the dominant narratives is this globalization versus deglobalization debate. So to what extent, we can say that, deglobalization is taking place? Of course, is it taking place in the first instance? Because some people call it slowbalization, some call it reglobalization. Some call it end of American globalization and beginning of a new era of globalization, which is not US-centric. So amidst all this, obviously trade wars are an integral part of current geopolitics. People used to call about the VUCA world, but now some people are saying that we have already transiting or we have already transited from a VUCA world to BANI world. BANI stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible. So how these trade wars are actually making this a bunny world? The narratives surrounding this whole globalization debate, as I shared few seconds back, globalization versus deglobalization, decoupling versus de-risking, global value chains versus regional value chains, where suddenly economics of trade and commerce, which propelled just-in-time inventory management, is suddenly being questioned. So what are the various drivers of this whole deglobalization, narrative? So in a very short span of time, we see that the world has transformed from, a time in 90s and early 21st century where we were talking about world without border narratives to, Fukuyama's end of history, Kenneth Omae's placeless and stateless. All that is yielding space now to, increasing nationalism, whereby someone is talking about America first, someone is talking about, make in India, someone is talking about made in China. And China is also now seeing that we are graduating from made in China to, innovate in China, thanks to, trade wars. So as we see spurt in protectionist measures in the form of tariff and non-tariff barriers, we are witnessing a scenario which is very, very confusing. In fact, one is not sure whether whatever is happening today is as a result of, collapse of many of the multilateral initiatives which have been a byproduct of, the so-called rule-based liberal international economic order, or the current developments are causing the weakening of these institutions. So amidst all this, what one is very clearly to witness is what is being called national securitization of trade and commerce. Number one, what are the salient features of this national securitization of trade and commerce? Number one, deep connectivities and complex interdependencies paving way for weaponized interdependence, creating all kinds of vulnerabilities, prompting, as I said, MAGA, Make America Great Again, Make in India, MIC 2025. Second, geopolitical comparisons between West and China is, perhaps one of the most dominating themes in as part of this national securitization, debate and discussions. Tech domain has become, the primary area of conflict, especially which started with Trump's disruption of the tech value chains and how Huawei and Nvidias of this world have become part of this interstate conflicts, which I will reflect on a few minutes from now. And suddenly one sees that there is a transformation in the relationship between multinational corporations and state. In the beginning of 1990s, the world said that liberalization, privatization, globalization is going to make non-state actors like multinational corporations as powerful as the state itself. But is that the case? One is definitely compelled to revisit that kind of a, narrative. So this national securitization of trade and commerce has led to what we can call birth of quote-unquote strategist state. This strategist state has become, very, very conscious about how it goes about pursuing, various national security goals by taking recourse to various economic statecraft tools in the form of tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Now, post-2008, there are studies which show that from post-2008, that is the American financial crisis happened in 2008, we all know that. Now, empirical studies show that there has been increase in the greenfield projects, and in fact, many of the greenfield projects have outpaced mergers and acquisitions in 2022. Now, greenfield projects, that is fresh projects, are an expansive component of international trade, and they are the most genuine prerogative of global interconnectedness between global economies, various areas of global economy. But simultaneously, you dig deeper, you see that a critical area of research has emerged where scholars are saying perhaps what we are seeing is, a lot of disgruntlement in various countries and across societies as a result of what is known as hyper-globalization. And therefore, this quote-unquote strategist state has emerged. Now, what is this strategy state doing? Number one, it is crafting policies in the direction of headwinds against FDI and free trade through notions of weaponization in three distinct areas. Number one, FDI. Number two, protectionist policies. And number three, misuse of various antitrust policies. So therefore, one can see as a result of this, international business is no more dominated by economics. We are seeing political dimension of international business dominating the agenda. So we see that today, inter-firm competition is replaced by interstate competition. And whether firms like it or not, they have been sucked into this interstate competition. And here, the win-lose, combinations are going beyond, non-zero sum, traditional non-zero sum understanding. So it's not that A wins and B loses, that is zero sum, but if it is something more than that. So it is about A winning more and B losing more. That's the kind of world that we are seeing. So therefore, firms are compelled to align with political agendas. International strategies of firms, have to be necessarily aligned with the geopolitical interests, leading to limited competition. The idea of the various states is now to ensure that how do I limit the competition or competitiveness of the other firms based in other states rather than strengthening one's own. Globalization is no more being seen as improving national economies through international cooperation and externalities, but intensification of interdependencies through rival states confronting each other. Michael Witt, management scholar with INSEAD, he some time back, just immediately after COVID, he interviewed board members of some 109 boards, and he was asking that what is the likely impact of this US-China trade war? And his findings say that we are going to increasingly find ourselves in a world which is going to be again witnessing on the lines of the Cold War, which was more on militaristic lines, but now we are going to see quote-unquote spheres of influence. And in this economic spheres of influence, firms have to necessarily choose, they'll be compelled to choose, either the Chinese, sphere of influence or the American sphere of influence. Interestingly, his conclusions are that, given that the world is witnessing more and more global supply chains centered around China, perhaps, it will be China which will be benefiting and US will perhaps be on the receiving end. So with these, with these remarks, I stop here. So therefore, the world, is going to be increasingly witnessing this kind of a geopolitical tension surrounding around trade war. That is what is, I think, one of the biggest impact of geopolitical factors on economy and trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. So Venkat did his PhD from the School of Government and Politics in Peking University. So I'm not surprised that he's painted such a bleak picture of the world. So over to Mr. Kelkar, and let's see if he has something more positive to say.
Professor Jacob, my fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, namaskaro. Namaskaro is how I say it in my mother tongue, Konkani, since I hail from Bangalore. I'm sorry, Jabin. I can't paint any different a picture from what Venkat has said, for the simple reason that the data doesn't bear it out, and I'm just talking about the data right now. There are three important issues that we should be looking at right now: China and global industrial production, all of which Venkat has reflected in his talks, the fragmentation of trade into blocks, and the potential impact of any Trump tariffs on global trade. Now, each of these issues is interlinked. Each of these is adding to complexity, and there's a great deal of uncertainty and ambiguity surrounding the future. So let's look at global industrial production. And this figure is quite stark. It's a UNIDO report which came out on, I think, October 29th. And by 2030, they predict that China will have 45% of global industrial production. Now, mind you, no one's seen that high levels of concentrated global industrial production in one country since the US after World War II. It's extremely consequential, and let's keep this in mind as we go forward. What this means is also that China will remain and will continue to be either a major supplier or buyer of finished goods or intermediates globally. Any shift in the direction of its trade will have a global ripple effect. You know, there's been a lot of talk about fragmentation, but now there's data that actually bears this out. This is data from the WTO in their October update, so it's just about a month old. Several authors, including Geeta Gopinath at the IMF, have talked about fragmenting trade into blocks. And here's the evidence for it. This is based on voting patterns at the UN after the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. So, and as you can see from this, there's a very clear bifurcation that's happening already. If you look at individual countries, China's imports by source, China's imports from G7, South Korea, and Japan are declining, while those from ASEAN and BRICS are rising. Let's look at what's happening with the US. US imports by source from China are declining in absolute numbers. But there's something very tricky that comes in here, which I'll come to in a minute. You look at the change in import shares over the last 5 years. Oxford Economics assesses that in 2018, when the Trump tariffs began, China accounted for 22% of US imports, but this fell to less than 14% in 2023. But China's share of US imports has been equaled or surpassed by other Asian states, the EU, Mexico, and Canada. What is happening is that US indirect trade exposure to China is rising, since Chinese goods now form a larger share of imports of US trading partners like Vietnam, South Korea, and Mexico. So China's industrial content, which we're talking about all these huge production levels that they have, is now getting embedded in the exports of third countries like Vietnam and Mexico. And these are the famous term that's being used for the last 1 year or so, the connector economies. Globally, if you see, the trend is a bit mixed. China's share in South Korean and Japanese exports have declined, and a similar pattern is visible even for the Germany and UK. But for countries like Vietnam and Mexico, it's rising. Now let's look at this, and this is a very crucial slide, because you look at foreign firms and their share in China's trade, both imports and exports. What is significant here is that foreign firms are slowly becoming less important to China's trade, alongside a push to localize supply chains. And this has an impact on that 45% number that we saw in the first slide. So do we have a potential problem? Probably we do. You look at this slide, and you can see China's gross fixed investment. Traditionally, in World Bank data shows that gross fixed investment on an average is between 23 and 29%. 2022, it was 27% globally. But you look at China, from 2004, it's been taking off. That's the orange line. Today, it's around 43%. This has never happened before in history. Not since 1945. Because traditionally, the fast-growing economies invested something like 34%. 34% was about a peak. And that was during the Asian Tigers age in the early 90s. Of course, China was a part of that, but the bulk of their investment has started after that. So now what's going to happen? If the rest of the world has to accommodate China's investment level, something has to give. Because you look at the green line on household consumption. China's investment is balanced by just $1.2 of consumption. It's about 1.2 something, close to 1.3, while normally World Bank data has indicated that if you're at about the 34% of gross fixed capital investment, you need about $3 of consumption. So China is not consuming enough, which accounts for their exports as well. And those massive capacities, so is overcapacity really a problem? Perhaps. There is evidence, it's been called a political statement, but there is evidence that there is some amount of overcapacity going on. Now here's another dilemma to this. Xi Jinping in May 2023 said that his vision of a modernized economic system had three elements: complete, advanced, and secure. Now he went on to explain what completeness means. He said, we must keep promoting transformation and upgrading of traditional industries and not take them as low-end industries to be simply eliminated. Now here's the problem. Typically through history, we've seen that as countries go up the technology ladder, the low-end, low-return industries typically go to some other markets. China wants to retain these, or Xi Jinping wants to retain these. If this does indeed happen, a great deal depends on China's trade partners' willingness to absorb some of these surpluses, or crucially, their ability to absorb some of these surpluses. Leave aside the political issue of wanting to absorb these surpluses. Do they have the ability to absorb these surpluses? Now let's come to Donald Trump. Bloomberg data, which came out, I think it was just 8 or 10 days ago, China's trade surplus is ready to hit already 785 billion in the first 10 months of this year, slated to hit close to 1 trillion, somewhere around 950 billion by the end of the year. Let's note that trade dependencies are advantages for China in any rivalry that it has with the US. But if Donald Trump does impose his tariffs, there's lots of evidence saying that, lots of talk by people saying that this is probably the number, 60% and 100% that he's talked about, are bargaining ploys. He might impose a lower tariff. One doesn't know. There's the Elon Musk factor that people talk about, but then I don't know how much that's going to work within the American system. So one doesn't know. But if Trump does impose these tariffs, China has considerable retaliatory power. We saw that in 2018 when he first imposed those tariffs, Trump 1.0. At that point in time, US agriculture jobs dropped by 70%, 70%. In 2022 as a consequence of China's retaliation on US agriculture with tariffs. The US-China Business Council report in 2024 report says any new tariff increases on imports from China could adversely impact the American agricultural sector if they trigger retaliatory actions. Does this necessarily mean that this is good news for other emerging markets or export agriculture-oriented economies like India? Yes and no. because America has a specific bag of imports, exports that it sends to China, like soya beans. Countries like India don't grow soya beans to that extent. So it's about the basket that you have and the complexities that derive therefrom. So what we are going to see is that globally uncoordinated nationalism and economic security-driven industrial policies will pose a huge set of challenges, because everyone's talking about an industrial policy for itself. The EU is talking about it, the US is talking about it, India is talking about it. Everybody wants Atmanirbharta in some sense or the other. Now, if Trump targets emerging markets, which are the connector countries, as an easier form of retaliation against Chinese origin goods, now these economies will face in turn severe dilemmas. So with this 45% growth coming in, the globe, IMF says last month in its October report that for the next 5 years, the globe is going to grow, GDP is 3.1%. If this is very tepid growth. Before the COVID era, we saw much over 4%. This is really tepid growth. So something's got to give. And the problem is going to come in the emerging markets. If trade fragmentation continues to accentuate, a stress on politics-driven blocks heightens, emerging economies are going to face quite a few hard questions. The question more so with the Trump administration will not just be about the Chinese component of their economy, but where their end markets will lie. The EU, the US, or the Asia Pacific. So because of this China-US rivalry, emerging markets are in for a hard time. So we're in for a rough ride. So please fasten your seat belts. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you, Professor Mohanty. I just thought it's interesting that in discussions of the economy or of trade, we now have two political figures make frequent appearances, which is Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. And I can't think of a period when when politicians with very broad ideas of the economy could have such a large impact as they do now. So this is why I say a little knowledge might be I mean, everybody says a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So please, once again to the students, please pay attention to what's being said here, because this is really going to impact your career trajectories. So yes, over to you, Professor Mohanty.
Good morning, everybody. Professor Chari, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, Alkaji, galaxy of academicians, students. I'll just present that the growing trade imbalance between India and China and how we can really combat that situation. Going back, just wanted to see, if you look at the history of India-China economic relationship, we see two important things: coercive and competitiveness. So over the centuries that you have seen, and I'll focus on that, what is happening at present is that trade deficit is growing at a much faster rate than our bilateral trade, which should be the reverse one. And many times it is seen in the literature that how competitive is China. So the wrong impression that we are having that China is very competitive is very much challenged from time to time. So how India has responded to China over the years, let us go to the history, world history. So people say that Sone ka chidiya, India, why it is so? In 0 AD, India's contribution was 33% of world GDP, and China was only 26%. And by 1000 AD, India continued to be the largest contributor to the world GDP with 29% and China with 23%. Then India started declining and emergence of China between 15 to 1600 AD. China became 24.5% India and China 22.6%. Then with the rise of China, again India competed, and by 2017, India became again the largest contributor of the world economy by contributing 24.4%, with China with 22%, 3%. And then you can see that India has got a sharp decline of its contribution, and between 2013 and 2073, both India and China lost their glory and their contribution reduced to a single digit. So what we see that India really competed over the years with China, and try to see. Most important factor is that what we see these days, growth rate is 4%, 5%, 7%. But very interestingly, if you see India and China between 0 AD to 1950, growth rate was less than 1%. And that was not the case with most of the European countries. Let us go to, if you are talking about the world economy and not to see other countries. Europe was the entire Europe, including Russia, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Their GDP less than India between 0 to 1500 AD. And between 15 to 1600, it was almost equal with that of India. If you look at European 4, I think between 1500 to 1700, less than India. Even before 1500 AD, there is no evidences of individual countries in Europe. There was no specific country like Germany, France. So they are all aggregated into one. UK, for example, was only 5% of India's GDP in 1500 to 800 in 1600, like that. Up to 1870, its GDP was less than that of India. So if we look at different, by 1998, there was a recovery of both India and China. And by 2023, China's contribution to the world gross product is around 18.7% and India 9.9%. So that is the history that India can really deal with China from time to time. Now the question is that with the huge trade deficit, there is huge myth that we can see in different areas. People say that India is highly dependent on China for trade, and the product that China can produce with competitiveness, no other country can match. So China is the most competitive one, that therefore we are so much dependent on China. Looking at the other aspect, that China is important for India, but not the other way around. India is not important for China, because our trade share is very low. We are exporting only 3% of China, and we are in a very weak footing. Now, coming to the empirics of it, we try to choose a very normal year. We chose 2018 as a normal year, and in that year, we imported nearly 4,044 commodities from China, and out of that, if we see, only 3,326 products are not competitive. So, using Wiener's trade creation, we very well see that China is not at all competitive. And but only thing is that there are several existing suppliers to India in different product lines where they are more competitive than that of China, but what they are lacking is in terms of volume. Therefore, they are unable to compete with China. So, therefore, it is important that how India is important to look at. China is important because of its huge trade surplus with the rest of the world. And India is the fourth largest contributor to Chinese trade surplus after US, Hong Kong, and Netherlands. Even UK is less than that of India. In case of US, Hong Kong, and Netherlands, their contribution to Chinese trade surplus is declining, but in case of India, it is going up. So therefore, it is important that we should change the narration that India is not important for China. You can see how trade deficit of India is declining over the years. In 2023, the trade deficit has gone down to $83 to $85 billion. How competitive we are when you talk about countries in RCEP. I try to estimate for most of the RCEP countries in different sectors, and we can very well see that India has got huge competitive advantage in diverse areas with most of the countries within the RCEP region. But the most important factor is that Chinese import is again regulated by a certain set of units, particularly they are known as SOEs, and they don't put indent to import from India. That is a major problem with China in terms of importing from India, despite India is becoming competitive. Some time back, we in WTO, we talked about that. Let us give us 24 products market access, which China denied. We only got 4 agricultural commodities through WTO. Now, this is what I said about trade surplus, that how in case of US, Hong Kong, and Netherlands, it is declining. But if you look at India, the trade deficit, trade contribution to Chinese trade surplus is growing. Now, the question is that what we import from China? We don't import primary commodities. In the total trade, it is only 0.5%. But mostly, what we import is intermediate. It is parts and components and semi-processed goods. And 1/3 is final goods. So what trade policy options we have? Now, we cannot raise a tariff. That is a very weak trade strategy. We cannot even stop importing from trade. We can be subject to answers in the WTO. So what maximum we can do? We can definitely do regulate imports, and we can also go for trade switching. And for that, we have to identify products where we can really restrict our imports from China. Out of 4,044 commodities that we imported in 2018, only 327 products comprising 2/3 of our imports from China. So if we regulate 327 products only, then we can really really have control over China. So these 27 products constituting only 8% of our total number of products from China, but in terms of trade, it is around 3/4 of our total imports. That I have shown in the figure, that how big is our total trade deficit of $66.6 billion out of $90 billion imports. Now it has gone up $101 billion in 2023, but only 300 to 26% products or 8% of products controlling our total imports. Now, what options we have? So, there are several existing suppliers in different product lines where they are more competitive than that of China. We can make use of them, and also we can look for other suppliers across the globe who are not exporting to India, and we have tried to examine at the product level, at 6-digit level for more than 200 countries, that how really India can switch over to other countries in these 327 products. So, and we found that substantial part of products can be shifted to other suppliers who can supply us at the same price or the price lower than that of China to India, and at the same time, some products which we can really go for import substitution or elimination. Already we started the process of PLI scheme, the product linked initiative schemes. Now, what these products, how much we can really diversify from China? It is nearly 90% we can diversify by making use of those existing suppliers to India and suppliers outside this group. Now, in this switching mechanism, that we see that in phases you can really do it, and we have estimated saying that out of these $66.6 billion imports, which is trade deficit, nearly $3.7 billion we can immediately shift to other countries. And in different, we have also analyzed at the product level, therefore we see that not 100%, but different set of commodities can be shifted to different other countries, so that we can really achieve that the reduction of trade deficit with that of China. So that I have shown that how much we can really shift to other countries. For example, $3.7 billion we can fully diversify or shift to other countries, but in other segments the switching of possibility is quite less. So we have identified that which sectors, how many countries, and what is the probability of shifting which is possible. I think the 4 sectors which are becoming very important, which we should be very guided about it, like chemicals, base metals, machinery, and automobiles. They are the 4 sectors where India has more dependence on China, and we have to take a different view on this. So to conclude, that India was dominant in the history since 0 AD, and we have restricted China over the centuries, and that we can also repeat. We have got a huge trade deficit with China, that is contributing to Chinese global trade surplus. I think if we diversify our trade deficit to imports to other countries, I think we can substantially reduce Chinese trade surplus with the rest of the world. China is not the most competitive one, but China has got the power of the large producer, so it can meet the huge import demand of India. Therefore, China is important and other countries are not there, but we can do it, and we can shift to other sources of imports. 90% of our imports from China can be shifted to other countries. 4 important sectors are important so far India-China trade is concerned: machinery, chemicals, base metals, and automobiles are the 4 sectors. They are critical sectors. I think the PLI scheme has to be reformed so that we can really meet our specific requirements. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mohanty. So if, let me just remind everyone that Professor Mohanty is from the RIS, which is a government-funded think tank. So I hope, Professor Mohanty, that your recommendations are going to be taken seriously by the government. It's quite interesting, the figures and the statistics that you've given us. If 327 products can make such a big difference, then hopefully the day is not too far off where we will address this long-standing trade deficit. But yeah, I have a bunch of questions, but we'll come to that later. So now over to Mr. Saqib, who, I mean, if you look at the speakers, they come from a range of backgrounds. Mr. Saqib has been in the weeds, as it were, of the India-China economic relationship for a very, very long time. So over to you, Mr. Saqib.
Namaskar. Good morning. Dr. Chari, Dr. Chaturvedi, Alka. I'm really grateful to be invited to this seminar. I am the last speaker of 2.5-day conference, so actually there's nothing left for me to say anything. But actually, after listening to Professor Mohanty, I just want to comment on his paper, but there's no time to do it, and I think it is important, and we should talk these kind of figures. And this is very, very important for our India-China relationship and our industrial development also. What I'll do is actually, I will stick to the topic. I do not have very in-depth research kind of a thing I have not done for this paper, because I thought I'll talk to students on my personal experience and anecdotes and discussions with the people. That will be much more interesting, because I am not all that intellectually equipped to discuss such things and all. So what is geopolitics? That Dr. Chari has very articulately explained it in the first meeting. And all geopolitical initiatives or actions lead to some kind of a economic activity or economic reactions, and that's we call it geoeconomics. And what geoeconomics is basically, when you use economic tools to drive whatever you want to achieve from your region or partner or country or whatever it is. And sometimes the economic tools which are used are some like America used sanctions against USA, or America put tariffs against China. And then you have other non-tariff barriers like certification, processing fees and other things and all. So what I'm going to do is that I'll just for the ease of it, state some geopolitical events and its implications, so you know how geopolitics affect the economic activities. For example, the current geopolitical event is Russia-Ukraine war. So what has done is that it has completely changed the economics of everything, Now, after US put sanctions on Russia, the Russian trade with EU reduced 40%. But it also led to an investment in energy sector in the Europe worth $200 billion, which is you can say it's a positive impact, but it is not economically efficient. So what you do is that when the geopolitical events happen, then some economic decisions are to be taken. They might look very good initially, but they are not very efficient. Similar thing happened in India also. When we had this Galwan, India took some initial actions like banning some products and trying to diversify our imports and all, and it did not really work. So maybe initially it looked like it will, but it does not work. Secondly, if you look at this, the Israel and Palestine war. Now there are a lot of disruptions are going on. So first was the economic implication. The second implication could be the long-term cooperation and all. So Israel war, apart from the economic implications that the Egypt is getting into this Red Sea is in trouble, and then there's no businesses happening, airports are closed, ports are closed and all. But the other impact, the long-term impact, what is happening in Israel is that the Israel and they had a Abraham Accord, which was like Israel was getting accepted by the other Muslim countries around the Middle East, and then they were getting Abraham Accord. That was a very important event. Probably now it is gone. Related to that was that there was another accord which was this India IMEC, India Middle East and Economic Corridor. Probably, I mean, after this Israel war, maybe that will also not work for some time. I2U2, there was another India, Israel, US and UAE, another accord. Probably this is not going to work. So there are certain, economic and political or regional cooperations which also get affected by these geopolitical events. Similarly, like the BRI. Now, the BRI is a huge project initiated by China, which is like $1 trillion project. 149 countries are involved in it. This BRI project, you can say this is they say that this is an economic sort of a initiative, but this is basically a geopolitical initiative. And this is going to create a new trade routes, new openings for business, and maybe new grouping for China and whoever is associated with China. So this is another implication of geoeconomic activity or events which is going to happen. And then there are some others, like regional free trade agreements can happen because of geopolitical events. Then you have other events like Quad is there, and AUKUS has happened, and Indo-Pacific framework. So there are a number of things which happen, and most of the things which happen in this world today is because geopolitical events which has happened somewhere else, but everybody gets affected. This is because, as Venkat said, that because of the intense globalization is happening and all. So theoretically, a business decision should be based on merits. But it does not happen because of geopolitical action somewhere else. So what is happening is that generally, goods and services are not moving freely. There is some cost attached to it because something is happening somewhere else. And then, so it leads to basic three things, that trade wars are increasing, investment are happening not or really on the merit of investment, they are happening because of something else, like USA, they imposed restrictions or sanction on Huawei, not allowed the chips to export to China, and it led to TSMC investment in Arizona. It is not a very efficient investment, but it did happen because of a geopolitical decision by government of United States. The second is then the investment, as I mentioned, in the European Union. It happened, this is not in an energy sector, $200 billion investment, but which is not a very, it's not really a sort of a efficient investment. Now, supply chain is changing. The thinking of supply chain is changing. Earlier, you must have heard about this Japanese just-in-time inventory, what happened. But now it has become just-in-case inventory, because you never know. So you would like to have your inventory somewhere close by where you have approach it and access it anytime if something happens and all. Then the investment, you are using your investment destination not on the economic criteria, but on a political criteria, that the country has to be aligned with my country and I should have a very politically good relation with that country and all. And also, for the investors, the screening has increased. In the European Union, 80% of screening has increased since like 2016 because of the geopolitical tension between China and USA. So now the result is that economic openness, a government has to choose between economic openness or national interest. a businessman has to choose between the political risk assessment or diversification. And the investor has to add global risk cost into its investment. So basically, the geopolitical activities creates a very inefficient kind of a system. Now, I think we have spoke enough about China, that how can China has creating its geopolitical space, and it has really been pretty successful. One of the, apart from the BRI, the other things which China has done geopolitically is, for example, they have this brokered the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's a big break for Iran, for China, and also for Delhi. It also has implications for India. We do not have time to discuss that, but I'll just mention it and all. The second thing is that China has done a 25 years agreement with Iran. Iran has been our close partner and cooperator for a long time. So it again has an implication on India. And then, of course, BRI is there, which we are not participant in it. But it is a very significant and important project for the world economy and relationship in future. There, I would like attention of Dr. Sachin and Dr. Chari. I was just discussing about the BRI, and I was talking to some of the think tanks in my last conference in China. And what they really say, they did not know that I am an Indian, because they saw my association in Dubai and my name as Muslim, so they thought maybe I am Pakistani or some Middle East country and all. And when I was talking about the BRI, they were saying that they are very comfortable working with India. They have a lot of trust, confidence, and if India was perhaps the part of BRI, they will feel much more confident about dealing with BRI, and probably they could have extracted some sort of a deal if India was there. So if India is there in BRI or any project which is taken by China in a big way, or any international project, the global south or the developing countries feel comfortable if India is part of it, because they feel that India can protect their interest. So this is very, very important. Okay. Since Dr. Chaturvedi and Dr. Chari, you have the eyes and ears of PMO and MEA, and you play an important role in policy, I think this thing should be conveyed to the government, that you should consider. Maybe India-China relationship bilaterally, maybe we think it is not important. But is it worth taking into consideration that it might help other developing countries if India-China come together and work together? Lastly, there's other points, but now I only have 2 minutes. What to the students I want to say is that we are on the cusp of new economic order or new world order. And you are the only assets we have. You are our greatest assets. You are our youth is our assets and all. And actually, the India gets so much attention not because of anything else, but because we have a huge population of youth and all. So you have a huge responsibility. So please try to think that what you can contribute tangibly to the government or to our country. Forget about what LGDP laws are there in China or something else. You must concentrate that how you are going to get tangibly contribute to this country and all. You are our future. You are future of this country. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. Namaste. Jai Hind.
All right. Thank you. So we have 13 minutes, and I must, I suppose, in order to earn my lunch, try and put together 4 very different presentations. Well, I think some are related, but the perspectives I thought were quite interesting and varied. So I mean, I suppose it's the easiest thing to assume or to think that there is geopolitical impact. But in terms of how it plays out is really the question. And both Venkat and Mr. Kelkar brought out, Venkat said spheres of influence, Mr. Kelkar said trading blocks. I think this is important. And in many ways, I think it's important to remember that China anticipated this particular geopolitical moment. If you look at Chinese activity in terms of how it has tried to shore up its economy against foreign ingress, everybody knows that Facebook, Google, all of this is banned in China. But this has been banned in China for decades. And nobody said anything about those things when China was already engaged in its own exercise of Atmanirbharta, right? I think that was also an expression that was used. But today, everybody has suddenly woken up and understood that China is engaged as a mercantilist player. So I think this reality, it's dawned on us a little too late that China looks at the world in zero-sum games. And what we see today, I mean, despite whatever Mr. Saqib has said, I think I'll have to disagree in terms of how we look at China. I mean, the Chinese might say a lot, but I think as the data from Professor Mohanty's presentation shows, despite Indian products being competitive, the Chinese have actively, willfully blocked Indian products from entering Chinese markets. So there is more than just economics at play. I want to get back to this slide that Mr. Kelkar showed about China's reducing dependence on foreign players. And this is not unexpected. I mean, China has always been building up towards this reduced dependence on the foreign world while increasing its own centrality to the global economy. So it's again not surprising that countries like the United States, the EU, should respond to it. And what we are seeing today is a weakening of global trading regimes and plethora of regional trading arrangements. So this is something that, again, we simply will have to deal with. Those were some of the broad points that I thought were important, stood out. Again, I just want to underline the point that the Chinese have anticipated this. The fact that they launched the BRI, and now the BRI has now split into 3 different very specialized initiatives: the Global Development Initiative, the Security Initiative, and the Civilization Initiative. I mean, these are all connected. Ultimately, it's about understanding that you do not have political weight or political standing unless you are an economic player, and you can also set the terms, set the discourse in terms of what is economic cooperation, globalization. I mean, Venkat said right at the beginning, he said it's globalization. One definition he gave was whether it is less of American globalization and more of Chinese-style globalization. And what is Chinese-style globalization? It's essentially another form of a mercantilist approach. So yeah, those are the quick points. My special thanks to all the speakers for this. Now over to you for questions.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, panel. My name is Omkar. And my question is, now that Trump has come to power in the US, so the entire campaign of Trump was on the basis of America first. So Trump it's said that he is going to increase tariffs, and as Professor Venkat and Vivek Kelkar sir also talked about some points on tariffs, and he's also been talking about dollar strengthening. So dollar strengthening is, as we also discussed in the panel, you people discussed that how the US-America relations is going to affect the emerging markets very negatively. So what is your view on the dollar strengthening and its impact on China as a country?
You talked about the Trump policies. That's going to be a little tricky. We have to remember that there is something called political rhetoric, and then there is actually, when politicians come to power, they talk a little differently or they act a little differently. Now, how is that going to pan out? One really doesn't know. All the guys that Trump has put into his team are China hawks. Having said that, there is a ground reality, which is a bit of data from the US-China Business Council that I didn't present. nearly 1 million jobs are supported by US exports to China. China has retaliatory power. Soybean farmers have been complaining. They've been very badly hit by the 2018 Trump 1.0 tariffs. So there's a whole lot of bargaining which will go on. A lot of this rivalry is going to be concentrated towards technology, particularly advanced technology. At some of the basic levels, it's going to be very different. Having said that, like I said, there is the outside chance, or there is not an outside chance, there's a decent chance that Trump will not immediately implement that 60% and 100% on various categories that he's talked about, sectors that he's talked about. But he would try and in his first year implement slightly lower tariffs on China, and there could be higher tariffs for emerging market countries, the connector economies. And that, like I said, has its own spin-off effects. So it's, at this point in time, we can only create scenarios about what would happen, and we can create risk probabilities about what scenarios are most likely to happen or least likely to happen, and attach risk weights to each of them. But hard to be concrete about this.
Yeah, I think, okay, that's a question we'll examine 6 months from now. Let's see. So the lady at the back, yes?
Good morning, sir. I'm Rucha, second year student at the department. My question is directed to Mohanty, sir. Sir, you suggested indigenization of production as one of the solutions to reduce dependence on China. But for these Indian products to diffuse well in the market and be cost competitive as well, recognition and demand from consumers should increase is my basic understanding. So sir, what do you think should be done, or at least probably what incentives are required to bring a change in the consumer behavior, at least in short or medium term, so that a consumer will prefer Indian products over Chinese products, or will try to find alternatives in case of unavailability, and will be ready to bear extra cost in case of high price. Thank you.
Professor Mohanty, if I might just add to that, I mean, more than Indian consumers, how to get Indian companies to walk the talk? Please.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question. What I mentioned in my presentation is that 90% of our dependence on China on critical products can be diversified in terms of taking new suppliers. New suppliers means existing suppliers who can augment their exports to India, and you can look for new suppliers who are currently not exporting to India but can be tapped, having the potential or the capabilities to export to India. So that would constitute 90% of our critical dependence on China. The 10% which we can do it indigenously, and those are not in any specific sectors, only specific commodities in specific sectors. What I said, that only 4 sectors where the product import could be more than $1 billion, like mobile equipments, many other API products, where one product itself import is more than $1 billion. So that kind of products, one can see that how best you can switch over to some other suppliers which are equally competitive than that of China. They can provide us with the same prices or below Chinese prices. So what we can do right now, for example, in base metal, steel is one. There are specific steel products where there are, if you look at HS products, there are more than 200 products under steel. Only 5-6 products which we are importing from China, where each one costs more than $1 billion. So in those specific products, how best we can do indigenization, because other countries cannot supply to us. So as you said that in terms of consumer products, I think India is emerging as a major market, and also if India's per capita income is beyond $2,000, and any product if you can supply to the domestic market, you can equally be competitive to export to the world market. So the important aspect is about the quality of the products, which we have to really focus on. And for that reason, we are unable to penetrate into several markets, including that of Latin America and Africa. So now the focus is on the quality of our products, and important aspect about the use of the space for firms, Indian firms. I think that is the another aspect that government has been focusing in the current years, that many schemes which are now more applicable to specific areas of production, where they can really go for import substitution and can product development. I did some study sometime back for Ministry of Commerce, sometime back in 2009, and the results is very clear that where India is lacking behind China. In many economic indicators, India was very similar to that of China, but only one area where India was lacking strongly, where India is also lacking at present, that is product development. China producing lot of consumer products, and where rocket engineering is not required. For lighter, if you add 2-3 features, you can easily sell it to any market. But that requires little bit of engineering, the connect between the universities and the manufacturers. China did it very well, and China also followed by other countries like Vietnam and others. But we are lacking to a very large extent to that. We are lacking in product development. In last G20, we focused on millets. Millets has got a huge market globally and in the domestic market. Kelkar is very known, but definitely there is no other such products like that. I think we should focus more on product development. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. I am Satyam, second year student from the DGIR. So my question is actually, especially from 2022, India is revaluing that rupee. So, but it has become our export is also getting that non-competitive, because our export is not that much of competitive now. So what is the main pillar of this policy? It is like penalizing the exporters but subsidizing the importers. So is it like the political rhetoric, like rupee nationalism, these kinds of things? So what my question is, what is the main reason for doing this?
All right.
Revaluing the rupee.
Thank you. All right. So I will again, I think, leave it to the journalist on the panel to answer this question. Maybe in a minute.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't get the gist of your question.
This rupee nationalism, I mean, where is it going? Is it effective at all?
The honest answer is not very much. So there's a lot of economic realities that are tied into that, which would take more than a minute to answer, but I'll be happy to this thing. Again, for this gentleman's question on the dollar, when this thing that I didn't answer on the renminbi. Again, there are complex realities tied into that. And don't expect the Chinese yuan to become a dominating currency for a long time, not until China is ready to accept a fully convertible yuan, and that's not going to happen easily. So there's a whole lot of risks that China does not want to assume globally. So there's a lot of hype about it in the media. I'm not really a journalist, as Jabin pointed out. I write columns, but I have corporate experience.
Somebody
But,
more in touch with the ground reality, I think.
Yeah, sort of. Because I talk to a lot of people from industry. But that's not going to happen immediately in the long term. Ignore the hype. Look at the economic reality. IMF has a very interesting database on how currencies are going and all that. It's the IMF COFER, COFER database. So you can calculate from that what's happening to trade, how much percentage of trade is the dollar, how much percentage of trade is the yuan, how much, all those things. And you'll find that the yuan is just 2.7%, if I remember the figure correctly, when I saw it last. So somewhere thereabouts. So it's a long way ahead.
Right. So thank you to all the speakers. I just wanted to get back to acronym that Professor Venkat gave at the beginning. What is it? Brittle, anxious, non-linear. It's the world and incomprehensible. But I think our four speakers have tried to make this particular topic a little more comprehensible. And to students, I would say that while the world and your own lives might look brittle, you're constantly under pressure and you get anxious, but some amount of non-linear thinking is quite good. Understand the world in asymmetric terms, and while India's, I think the angst in the room is that why is India so behind, right? But there are answers, there are possibilities, and the idea is to be creative, to think out of the box, and of course to pay attention when experts are speaking. So let me end by thanking once again Manipal, Mr. Chari, Amrita, Anand, for all the hard work behind the scenes, and I thank especially the students for paying attention. I mean, I see most of you are looking down at your phones, but I expect you guys are taking notes, right? Okay, fine. So thank you again. And thank you once again to the speakers.
Thank you to the panelists and the chair for leading an intellectually stimulating discussion. Now I would request Professor Venkat Raman to offer token of appreciation to the panelists.